But another Alvin, I appreciate that. Another important component of Homes for All is really tenants' rights and advocacy and organizing. And so we want to just take some time today to have a conversation about that with some tenants and then some people who have been working with tenants and organizing and getting resources around that just to get a little bit more of a feel of what's really going on here and why it's important and how we can get involved. So we have Aprili here with us and Patricia Basile here as well. And then there might be a couple more hopefully joining us as well to kind of round out this conversation. So thank you both for being here, and we can definitely make this a conversation with all of us, but really wanted to kind of feature this, um, these people in the area tonight. So what I was hoping to get started with, if Aprili and Patricia could just tell us whatever you feel comfortable sharing related to like your journey as a tenant and like in tenant advocacy and organization. So yeah, kick us off, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Go ahead, Aprili.
Okay. Well, it's been really interesting. I think that my my beginning with tenant advocacy started with my experience fighting my landlord last year mainly, and it was very heart-wrenching, very much so triggered my anxiety and so many things. And what I will say is that the best thing that came out of my fight is the fact that I realized how much Indiana law is catering to landlords disproportionately and really favoring landlords unfairly. And um, I guess I would say that being able to work in tenant advocacy now really is something that has just become such a highlight, and it makes me feel so purposeful in terms of having gone through what I went through. So um, I, I I have no idea how I ended up having to fight my landlord. It was almost it started out as a pretty um cordial relationship, and then between his business partners and things like that, they just ended up trying to um put me out of my housing. And while I was able to win a case in court that uh, granted me emergency entrance into the residence, they did not fulfill the requirements, basic health codes that needed to be kept up once I moved in. And then so of course I needed to move out, and then I went back to court and all these things, and we ended up being at like a standstill and or a stalemate, and it was devastating, absolutely devastating in terms of the resources I lost. I could not really afford to lose those resources, and it was just really revealing in terms of what tenants have to go through. And I just am grateful that I have found community in my fight. And I've been able to, since join Indie Housing Project, and also use my skill set towards research. And I'm really also grateful for Patricia to see in me uh, the resource, see me as a resource in order to contribute to her research. So um, if there's anything that I can share more or offer in terms of my services and things of that sort, I really look forward to just learning how I can be a resource further to tenant advocacy in Indiana and throughout our region. So I'll just say that for now and pass it over to Patricia.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aprili. I'm Patricia Basili. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Geography at Indiana University. I think most of you already know me. And I got to this question of tenant rights in Indiana, specifically through Homes for All, actually. So through this space and this network of amazing people. I started kind of tagging along a few years ago when I moved to Indiana to learn about the organizing of the Community Land Trust, because I'm a scholar of Community Land Trust as well. And then started hearing about questions of tenant rights in Indiana in this space as well. And got really, really intrigued. One of the members that was also part of Homes for All was Andy Beck, and today he is the manager of the Tenant Advocacy Program, which is a program by the city of Indianapolis that places tenant navigators in small claims courts to support tenants as they go through the process of evictions. So I've been able to learn a lot from this space, from the Homes for All space, and from Andy and his work and the tenant navigators. And I'm a researcher, so I love asking questions. And when I kept hearing about that Indianapolis had some of the highest numbers of evictions in the country, I got really intrigued. I started asking the question of why is that the case, that a city like Indianapolis, which is definitely not some of the largest city, even like Indianapolis is second to New York in terms of eviction numbers, right? So that's a really kind of thing that I thought it was really absurd, and got really really wanted to know why, and started asking people why is Indiana or in Indianapolis in that position. And I kept hearing similar answers. Some of those answers were, oh, because the state legislature favors landlords, right? Because there are no tenant protections in Indiana. Those are some of the answers that I kept hearing. And as a researcher, I'm still asking, well, why does the state legislature favors landlords in their policy making, right? Like in the law making. Why are there why do they not protect tenants in the legislature process and law? So I also been able to work with Andy Beck and the tenant navigators um, through a class project. I taught a class on qualitative methods, and there was a need for stories about the experiences of tenants going through eviction. So the students in that class that I taught interviewed the tenant navigators, and we presented our findings in Indianapolis. And since then, this has become a issue that I'm highly involved in terms of my advocacy and organizing, and also in terms of my research. And in partnership with with Andy Beck, with tenant leaders like Aprili and Cyan, we created a collective. It's called the Indy Housing Project, like Aprili mentioned. And we are a group of people that seek to provide resources for tenants and to provide information and advocate for tenant rights in Indiana. And we've created a few things so far, and I can talk more about them as we move in the conversation. We also have Brian, who is also a part of the Indy Housing Project Collective. But yeah, I can talk more about the things we've done so far later.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much for all your good work. And we'd like to welcome Aaron and Steph to the call. And If you'd like to share how you found out about us, we're talking about tenants' rights and organizing tonight, so if either one of you would like to share, thanks.
I'm so sorry. I had myself unmuted and I am eating my dinner, so I hope none of you heard me. Um, I have been to a few meetings previously, but it's been a while. I lived in Bloomington. I'm from Anderson and then spent time in Indianapolis and did some organizing work in Bloomington around a Housing First program and a co-authored like narrative project there. So very glad to be jumping into this call and hearing about work that's happening.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Steph Hines.
That's amazing. I don't have a book, but congratulations on yours. And everything that Curfew is doing is wonderful, and I'm just glad to be here.
Okay, Stephanie.
Oh, it kind of cut out, but were you passing it back to me? Okay, no worries. I see the thumbs up. Thank you so much. So now I would love for you to just tell us a little bit why, set the stage in Indiana for us a little bit, and maybe I'll kick it to you, Patricia, first for more of, I know you've done a lot of research around this, and then maybe Aprilli can help break it down a little more for us and her experience, kind of going from bigger into smaller. What's going on here in Indiana? Why is this important? I mean, I obviously am passionate about it, but love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started talking a little bit about it. And a lot of my research right now is looking into the question of why the legislature favors landlords and how that favoring impacts the experiences of tenants, right? And one of the reasons why this, I like to call it an ecosystem of housing that is very precarious for tenants because there are no tenant rights, is created is has to do with a lot of many different things. And one of the things is the role of the Apartments Association, which is a national organization that has state chapters and has a state chapter in Indiana, and is a one of the biggest lobbyists of the state legislature. They donate a lot of money to finance campaigns, political campaigns for senators and House representatives. So they're very much, and they are a lobbying organization for multifamily apartments and landlords, right? So they have a specific interest in the financing and support they do for legislatures. And it's, I think a lot of the questions that I'm asking is how that support then translates into legislatures lack of support for tenant rights, right? So not supporting legislation that would protect tenants. And then how that translates into the realities of housing, right? And into, for example, the tremendous increase in corporate landlords, which are landlords that are huge, that have a very, very big scale, that oftentimes is even very hard to identify what the main, who they are, because they hide themselves in between several different LLCs, which is limited liability companies. So there are different mechanisms that these big landlords, corporate landlords, also have to prevent themselves from being held accountable. And in Indiana, that is made worse because they are empowered by the state legislature to not being accountable, right? So things like we don't have an escrow legislation, which allows, if we had one, it would allow tenants to put their rent in an escrow account if there were any issues with their housing, right? Until the landlord fixed it, then the landlord would get the rent. We don't have that type of legislation. There's no right to counsel in Indiana for tenants, right? That's a big problem because we know almost 100% of landlords have representation in the court, while very little amount of tenants have support of a lawyer when they're in the court, and that leads to huge imbalances of power in the space of the court. We also know that the application of the law and the realities of small claims court varies depending on the court, right? So we know that there are judges that place more consideration into how they're dealing with every eviction filing. So they'll ask questions of tenants. They'll treat tenants as human beings, right? They'll ask questions. Have you talked to a lawyer? Have you talked to a tenant navigator? Have you gone through mediation, right? Like, can we get a payment plan in place to prevent an eviction? While there are other judges that treat tenants as a case number, and it's very fast. I don't know if any of you have ever been to, I know some of you have been to small claims court, and it's like very fast, like 3-5 minutes is a new tenant being evicted. So it's obviously is something that is very multifaceted, right? It's not a simple answer in how this reality was created over time, but these are some of the questions, some of the things that have contribute to the creation of this environment for tenants that is very precarious. So I'll leave it at that and can answer questions if people want to know more about something specifically.
Yeah, I do have a quick question before we pivot to Aprili. I've heard a lot about this corporate landlord situation here in Indiana. Do you have any feel of if this is kind of a growing phenomenon nationally, or is this like a specific challenge that we're facing here?
It is a growing phenomenon nationally and internationally as well, not only in the US. And what are the specific markers that researchers have found for the increase of corporate landlords is the financial crisis of 2008, right? So ever since the end of that financial crisis, we've seen a significant increasing of these large-scale corporate landlords, these monopolies, right, of multifamily apartment buildings and also single-family homes. And there's been some research done about that in specific cities, right? None done. There's some things that have come up in Indianapolis, but there's less about what are the reasons why that was possible, right? What were the reasons that allowed for these monopolies to be created specifically after that crisis? But it's definitely not only an Indiana phenomenon.
I have a question, and it relates to policy, and I think something I've heard, and I'm wondering if it's true, is that in Indiana, it's difficult to get policy passed that protects tenants because a number of the legislators see this as just an urban issue. It doesn't relate to rural. And do y'all find that to be true?
That is a great question. And I think Andrew could probably help us answer that as well. I don't know if you want to jump in, Andrew, later, but I have heard that. I haven't done research specifically on that question. I am working with someone at IU, a research assistant that is looking specifically into the question of rental housing in rural areas. But that is definitely an argument that I have heard before about the need for or the lack of need, right? Like for the non-existence of tenant protections. But I would be curious to hear what Andrew has to say.
I'm happy to say, very briefly that yes, that is exactly right. In my experience talking with Indiana legislators, many of them think that the state's housing safety and eviction problems are an Indianapolis problem. Or maybe they'll extend that and say, well, Indianapolis and maybe South Bend and maybe Fort Wayne and Evansville. But our data and the partners that we hear from throughout the state, we know that it is due to those, it's the legislation and its policy that is statewide in rural and suburban and urban places alike. The problem is that not enough of the people in those other areas are contacting their legislators. And in some ways, it can be almost counterproductive for more people from just Indianapolis and maybe South Bend and Fort Wayne to be reaching out to the legislators from those places instead of people from their own areas. So that's part of my perennial challenge, is how do we activate and engage people who are from those districts to help educate those lawmakers.
Thank you. Thank you both. Aprilia, you want to try to tackle that question from your perspective?
Well, I think that is a great segue into my involvement with tenant advocacy. I think that it is definitely I was going to say profitable, but productive to invest in tenant advocates in terms of those of us with lived experience, to invest in us in terms of education and things of that sort, policy, education around policy, legislation, and so on, in order to really kind of keep the momentum that those of us with lived experience have. And really sometimes it's like the passion that you can witness in our advocacy based on the fact that we have had these experiences. And so I guess I just wanted to mention that I think it's really worth it to organize amongst people who are willing to stand up based on kind of courageously working through their own battles. And so I know that at the last panel that I sat on, I was really encouraged to hear about some of the organizations that are extending their services to tenants. When I was going through my court battle, it was mainly Indiana Legal Services that stepped in to assure me that that what was happening to me was illegal, and that while they were limited in terms of their time and resources, they were able to share certain points that I could focus on in terms of what is it called when you're basically acting on your own as in a court of law, when you're representing yourself. And so yeah, I wanted to mention Indiana Legal Services, Patchwork Indy, and Fathers and Families. And there were a few other organizations, even some churches that have stood up to ensure that tenants are able to be educated on the laws that are benefiting us. And also these organizations have provided resources in other ways. And so I wanted to just share that in terms of the idea of investing in folks who have gone through this process. I think that that's where we're going to see a big change in terms of people kind of rallying behind um this difference that needs to be made. So I just think if we could maybe shift focus on like bringing out tenants who are affected by this. I don't know if it's possible to have representation alongside Indiana Legal Services at the um, small claims court proceedings or things of that sort, to really get out the word that there is an effort to organize tenant advocates. But I think there are probably many spaces where people who have been wronged by the system could be informed that there is a movement to empower tenants. So thanks.
Yeah.
So I imagine that's what was being. Oh, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I imagine that was what was being kind of referenced when you mentioned, Andrew, educating tenant advocates and things of that sort. There was something else that you said. You mentioned education, and I wonder if you could restate what else you mentioned in terms of ways that tenant advocates can be kind of more involved in the process.
Oh, I was just saying, again, from my experience, like I do a lot of work directly, like in the state house and trying to talk with legislators and being a convener. And from my experience, they need to hear it from people who live in their district. Legislators do definitely need to hear from people with lived experience. And it's just most effective when they're hearing it from somebody who can describe the neighborhoods they represent. It's kind of hard for them to translate, for whatever reason, the experiences of real life people from Indianapolis and think about what that means in Granger, Indiana, or Martinsville, or Vincennes, or whatever. Like they need to hear it from the perspective of the people who are living in their communities. And that's just the challenge of scale of building out tenants unions and organizations who can activate and reach people who are experiencing the very same issues like you unfortunately have had to live through. And so thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing that. I wonder, are there spaces or forums, listening sessions, things of that sort that are currently on the calendars, or just opportunities for tenants to kind of sit in, maybe even a program like Indie Documenters can be created. But I just wonder about opportunities for tenants to. Oh, okay. So just wondering about if there is a chance at all for tenants to be heard that maybe we're just not aware of.
That is a great question, really, and something I don't know much about. I know, I think with the resource, the Indie Tenant Project, there was some kind of community gathering, like even May 1st, with some like listening sessions or tenant sharing together that a couple of you would maybe know more about. I don't know if that's along the vein of what you're talking about, or really just trying to brainstorm, and I hear you.
this isn't mine. I didn't put this on, so I don't want to take up more time, but I'll drop a link in the chat. The Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition that my organization convenes, one of the members there is the Indiana Tenants Association, and my understanding they're trying to build out across the state. I'll put a link in. If there's anybody who wants to get involved with the efforts that we're doing, I'm happy to make introductions with people that I know. But again, I'm myself not an organizer, and I don't want to claim that. But happy to connect people with the organizers that I know, in addition to the folks putting on this event.
I love it. Thank you, Andrew. And we had hoped to have a representative from Indy Tenants here today, and unfortunately weren't able to make it. That would have been perfect timing for them today, but I appreciate you offering to help make that connection, Andrew.
So I have a question. Indy Tenants Association, is that Indianapolis focus, or are they a state organization that works on trying to help organize tenants in different places?
I think it's the Indiana Tenants Association, but correct me if I'm wrong, that's trying to organize across the state.
What I know, if folks have ever met Dee Ross, Dee Ross he's the founder of the Ross Foundation, and several years ago had founded the Indianapolis Tenants Rights Union. And then about a year ago, branched that out and started calling it a new initiative, or building it out to an Indiana Tenants Association. And my understanding is he is trying to seed and grow tenants unions in cities and areas around the state. My understanding is he's talked with folks in South Bend and Fort Wayne and Anderson and Lake County and a few other places. But again, I don't want to speak for him. I know that that's an effort that's starting, or that's growing and underway.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I would add that Hoosier Action also organizes statewide and specifically tenants. I've met Stephanie Zhang, who is an organizer and a housing organizer who was working with tenants in other places across the state that were not Indianapolis. So that's another, I think, organization to connect with.
Can you repeat the name of that organization?
Hoosier Action. I can drop the link here in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
I beat you to that. I dropped their link in, and yeah, that Hoosier Action is another member of the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, and I know that they focus on rural and small town areas, especially in southern Indiana. But I also know that they're starting to grow out with a presence in the South Bend and northern Indiana area. So there are, again, from my perspective as a policy advocate and kind of a coalition convener, I'm seeing some of these tenant union groups start in Indiana. And I know that there's some really great models, like Kansas City Tenants Union is really strong. There's a really strong tenants union in Louisville. But I'm here to learn, and I'd love to help facilitate that as much as I can do in Indiana.
I also wanted to just share that when Mari was with Patchwork Indy, she was able to introduce me to more of a regional tenant advocacy training, and that was heavily attended by Kansas City and Louisville tenant advocates. And I can actually look up what that group and training was called, but I just wanted to mention that there are efforts for those in the region who are finding success to train others throughout at least the greater Midwest region. So it's starting and it's exciting.
And I would just add really briefly that I think some of our goals as a collective in the Indie Housing Project is also to combine resources as a way to empower tenants to become tenant leaders and tenant organizers and to tell their own story. And we've done that in different ways. Like we've organized storytelling events where we paid tenants honorarium to tell their stories and to be speakers in the panel. And we are fundraising to organize a series of events in the fall and to bring people from Kansas City and Louisville to exchange with tenants here, tenant leaders here. So I think a lot of our goals is to also be a supporter of tenants and tenant organizers and whatever that is, right? Like a lot of what we do is just listen and act accordingly. And I'll share, we've created a website because of those efforts. I'll put the link here as well. One of the main things that we wanted to create with this website is a chatbot. So it's like a kind of AI chatbot that you can ask questions about evictions, eviction filings, legal aid, and all kinds of different questions. And it will automatically give you a response and give you links to resources and other organizations that can provide support with very simple non-legalese language. And Brian, who is here with us, he was the creator of this chatbot, and he can speak, and he's also a tenant navigator, so he can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can chime in here a little bit. And I will say that the chatbot, it actually isn't an AI chatbot. It's a chatbot that I like entirely coded all of the flows for. I wanted to make it a point to that I didn't want it inventing any policies or anything. If anybody's heard about some of the issues with AI, but so yeah, so it's entirely designed to guide people to resources and guide people to resources on our webpage. A lot of the other websites that exist for tenants to find help, especially in Indianapolis, are very clunky. They're very like hard to navigate. So our goal was to try to make the simplest possible website to where people can get to the resources they need as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
And I'll just add that this is very much kind of an ongoing project. So we still would love to listen. We still need to do more work in terms of sharing this resource with tenants. I think we've shared with a lot of organizations that work with tenants, but not with tenants directly. So I think we need to do a better job in doing that. And other things that we want to do is a crowdsourcing tool where tenants can upload information about what their rent is, the conditions of their apartment, things related to their landlords, so people can see like what are different people in different apartments paying in their same building, right? So information for tenants is something that is important and can help in organizing. So these are some of the things we're thinking about creating.
That's great. And there have been some great questions. Appreciate you all. I didn't know if anybody else had any questions before we kind of wrap up today, especially Aaron and Steph. Didn't get to hear as much from you. If you had anything that you'd like to say, we'd love to make sure that you've gotten any questions answered as well.
Yeah, good evening. This was very empowering, and it's important for all tenants to really know their rights. And sometimes they do get pushed around because they do not have the attorney, and these policies are not made at all for any tenants. And that's disheartening and Indianapolis has such a high rate of eviction that it's like, why would anybody want to rent? But they are usually have to because it's hard to even buy a house. People should be able to not have to, I am forced to rent, because I can't buy a house. That type of thing has to end, as well as the tenants in the same building. Some are paying more than others, and that's crazy too. So I do like what you're saying about how, how would that look, how to get that started where, that it's the tenants being on the same team and not fighting against one another, I guess, for competition. Renting is competitive, and that's kind of, I don't know. I think it would be good to know, how much somebody else is paying, but then it would probably upset somebody else that they're not paying that lower price. Just an insight. But it is good, because things should be transparent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just gonna say thank you for this, and it was really nice to be able to join, and I'm looking forward to further conversations.
Thank you. I wanted to also share that I did find the the link and the name of the organization that put on the training. Mainly it was like Greater Midwest, but I think it was also open to the entire nation. So that training is in the chat. That training was called Homes Guarantee, Fundamentals of Tenant Organizing, and that was put on by People's Action. And so peoplesaction.org is there in the chat. And then for anyone who would like to know a bit more, there is a Google document that I'm just putting in the chat that has collected a lot of the resources, PowerPoint presentation, all kinds of information about what some of the organizations across the nation have used to tenant organize. So I want to say thank you. I'm really glad that we had a chance to come together, and hope the sharing of these resources can evolve into even more action. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I've been gathering these resources as you've all have shared them, and I'm thinking we can maybe add it to our next newsletter as well, just to get them out to people who couldn't join us today, and hopefully continue to spread some of these great resources. This was really, really rich in that vein. Thank you all for sharing.
I don't know if I missed it or not, but I was just wondering if it was shared what Indie Documenters does, and do they have a role in like evictions or tenant advocacy or anything like that?
Hold on one second. So I'm fairly new. What our main role is to document community meetings and take notes, or we also do audio and tweet coverage or Twitter coverage, excuse me, or X coverage of community meetings and share them with the community. So because a lot of people cannot always, they're not always available to make the meetings. And so it just helps people to be able to be informed about the different organizations and issues going on around the city. And we post them, and people have access to them. We work with Mirror Indie. And so you people can oftentimes access a lot of those meetings and reading the notes. To my knowledge, I don't think we have anything, but I can certainly ask.
The Indie Documenters documented our last event, which was the release of the website. I have the
Hmm.
link to the documentation. I can share. It has the audio recording. It's wonderful. Thank you.
And we've talked about a few of these, but any other suggestions from anyone in the group about ways that we can get involved to help make this better for all of us living here? And how can we support our tenants with lived experience? How can we, rally our legislators? Like, I'm opening the floor here.
I do invite people to join our collective if they're interested. We meet every 2 weeks on Fridays afternoon. We have a meeting this Friday. Is online as well. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do and want to join our collective, you're welcome to join the meeting. I can share the link too.
And I want to say, and Alvin could probably share more about it, but Kepler, we host weekly community conversations on issues that affect the community. It's called Mumbo Jumbo every Friday from like 3 to 4:30. So, if there is something that, and we have had in the past, like I think we had KC Tennis Union come and talk about the work they've done. But if there's something that y'all feel like is coming up, or it would be great to hold a conversation and let the community know about it, that's something that we can help with.
Well, to that point, thank you, Pambana. For World CLT Day, our mumbo jumbo on May 17th.
Yeah, next Friday.
Next Friday, we will be hosting the conversation on community land trust, and Patricia will be one of our guests, as well as John Davis. And Alma's going to put it in the chat, but we're very excited about that, and invite all of you to that conversation, and we'll send out the link because the more information we can get on community land trusts and the things that are happening in the state as well as the city, the better. And aren't we going to have a guest from the Bloomington CLT? That's Patricia and the
Yeah,
Avalon.
Patricia's involved with the group.
Okay. And Avalon CLT as well.
And next month on our Homes for All call, we're going to have Rabbi Aaron, who's been with us before, to talk about court watching. So it will be an interesting conversation that some of you may have some awareness on, but excited to learn more about that next month as well.
Fantastic.
I'm about to put the link in the chat. Give me 1 second. Boom.
All right. There it is. All right. So, does anybody else have anything you'd like to share? No. Well, it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks
Thanks.
for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
See you
Yeah,
next
special
time.
thanks to Aprile and Patricia for sharing your experience and committing some time tonight. Really good to see you and appreciate you.
No,
Yeah,
I love
everybody.
this space. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
all.
Good,
Everyone.
everybody.
Thanks everybody.
See
Have a
you.
good night.
Night.
Good night.
Bye.